It's not something that AI is really going to be able to swoop in and do for us.
Yes, uh, you're absolutely right. There is no way, and I can say that with confidence today. The human interaction with the guidance of the therapist is
Yeah.
transformative. And
Yeah.
yes.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. We've been getting some new and exciting episodes going. So I'm personally very, 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 very excited for today's episode because I have a friend and mentor and an incredible human in our industry and our profession as therapists with me today, Dr. Rick Butts. Hello. Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be with you, Liz. I've been thinking about you and just spending this time with you today.
Yes, me too. So we have an exciting history, I would say, because a few years back, as I was looking for the next steps to take in my own clinical training and growth, I was going down a bunch of rabbit holes and knew I wanted to find something that really up-leveled my abilities and strengths as a therapist to help people just moving through the real, raw, vulnerable stuff of relational healing. And I came across your organization, your institute, the Healing Our Core Issues Institute. And you are the co-founder of this institute, and it's done nothing short of change my life completely. I'm certified now. It's been a wild last few years, but just incredibly grateful for the work that you and Jan have done together, and hoping you can introduce our listeners a little bit to what the Healing Our Core Issues Institute is.
Well, Liz, it's been a privilege over the last 4+ years to get to know you. I had the opportunity to be a part of your training and then lead you through the consultation program and do some additional work together, which we may talk about at the end, and opportunities for those that are listening to you to do their own experiential process with you that I mentored you in. And so I mean this when I say it, is that it has been a delight over these 4 years. And I'm honored to be here today, not just to represent the Healing Our Core Issues Institute, but as your friend to just sit with you about uh, what I believe about the healing journey for all of us.
Yeah. And that right there is just one of the things that's been just one of the most beautiful elements of the experience is how relational we all get to be with each other as we learn and grow and develop as therapists, as co-travelers, as we call it, right? And I've just valued that so much. I kind of can't believe, like, in my work world, I've gotten to build such real and true, honest friendships, like with the cohort I was a part of and all that stuff. So, and we're all over the country. So that's really amazing. You're tuning in from Ohio. So, a little ways away
Yeah,
from Texas.
yeah, it was an incredible group that you were a part of, and yes, each one of those women that was in that group, as you just said, that I'm thinking about them. Yeah, it truly was all over the country,
Yep.
literally, and so again, just to be here today and just to share these things with your folks who are listening to us is, like I said, just a privilege for me to be here with you.
Thank you. Well, Rick, tell us a little bit about kind of the core pillars of HOCII is our abbreviation for the Healing Our Core Issues Institute,
Mhm.
but kind of the three processes involved in this work, and for those just have no idea what it is, the nuts and bolts in a couple minutes of what it is.
Mhm. Well, you and I talked right before we came on, um, that the historical context, and I'm a historian, is that in 2013, Jan Bergstrom and I had a vision for a developmental and relational model of counseling, rooted in several traditions. The work that we have developed, and I'll talk about briefly, was informed by the work of Pia Melody and her work in the field of addiction and recovery and codependence. It's also very much informed by, and I was thinking about this, Liz, and this is part of what I love about this work is as a graduate student in finding my way, is that it looked at all the things that I thought are really important. It has a mindfulness focus in that one of the most important things for all of us as we begin into our healing is to learn how to be present in this moment of our lives. So it's like that everything that we do in this model is about having a sense of self. And that
Mm.
I believe that overarching theme helps all of us to be relational with other people. And like you said, that is very much a part of how we think about this. We link it to this idea of psychodynamic theory, which means that growing up in our families had a huge impact on us. And that impact shows up in our lives. So when we have a sense of self, when we get triggered and move into reactivity, this is talked about a lot, but I believe our model is such a hope-based model that it gives the idea of, oh, there that is. That's a part of me, and that I can move out of it. And we're very much cognitive again in what are those beliefs and behaviors, how do they show up in our life. It's a body based because of all the training that I've done in attunement to self and the sensations of our body. And it's very much an experiential journey where it is really guided in an opportunity to do some incredible mind sight, or excuse me, uh, mind's eye work that is
Mhm.
linked to the tradition of Gestalt theory. And so I could talk at length about each one of those things, but for those of your listeners, it's basically about understanding where I've come from. What do I think? What does that look like in my life? And what can I do about it? If I were to put it into a nuts and bolts, that would be what I would want the folks who are listening to us is I think it's a really a nice, well-rounded way to approach life.
Yes, and oh, I love that you said that right there because it's been that to me, and as I've worked with clients and introduced them to this kind of work, I'm like, this isn't just popping in and having a therapy session where we're doing this, like it's cultivating a whole different kind of lifestyle and a very
Mm-hmm,
relationally well lifestyle.
mm-hmm,
And it while it is this work that we're doing often on an individual level, like with individuals in therapy,
mm-hmm,
it like just it's that butterfly effect. It influences every
mm-hmm,
single relationship in your life.
mm-hmm,
And for anybody that's like was like, wow, you know, following along with what Rick was just describing this model is influenced by and comprised of, it's a lot, and it was one of the
mm-hmm,
things that impressed me and excited me so much, but it's everything. It's like how we think about things, how we feel in our bodies about these things, and what's going on with our body when we're, you know, deepening in what's true for us or
mm-hmm,
not. And then, like, the experiential component is just so important to highlight because again, we're
mm-hmm,
not just sitting there talking about the daddy issues or the mommy issues. It's like we're actually going into those relationships. We're going back into ourselves in very experiential ways, and I love it. It's not something that AI is really going to be able to swoop in and do for us. So we'll always be in business, right?
I I so appreciate you saying that about AI, which is very current in our lives. And yes, uh, you're absolutely right. There is no way, and I can say that with confidence today. We don't know about 30 years from now, but at this
True.
moment, the human interaction with the guidance of the therapist uh, is
Yeah.
transformative. And
Yeah.
yes.
Truly. So, like, in Hawkeye, we talk a lot, we use the terminology of like core issues, and we talk about birthrights and the birthrights of a child. the birthrights of a human are something that we're going to spend a little time on today in our conversation. But do you think you can kind of define and differentiate for us what are the core issues that we talk about, and then what are birthrights?
Yes, it can. And we can also come back after we go through this. I was just thinking of this, Liz, and then walk somebody through what that would look like for them. Like just give them
Yes.
an idea if they were going to do an experiential process. What does that uh, look like today? Because I really like how we guide clients into this mind's eye work and the experience of that. But the way that I would suggest this, and maybe you can put this in your notes, you can put the chart in, and that as people are
Yes.
listening, I know they're listening to this, it's helpful. But the core issues. Oh, is this being videoed or is this just audio?
I wasn't going to say anything if you didn't ask because I didn't want it to like spike up the nerves. I'm recording both. If you're
Okay.
like completely mortified and don't want a video out of you, then I won't put it. But yeah, I was going to use both because I think it catches different people, on the different platforms.
Yeah.
Plus, you look very calm and collected, so it's fine. But I'm definitely gonna drop a link or some kind of connection to this resource that's on your website to the core issue chart because it's a massive tool through this work.
Well, that's hilarious because I did just think it was audio. And so, as people who are watching us saw, when you pulled that up, which I have mine too, just to kind of guide, even though, I, as your teacher, and encourage you to have this memorized. But the
Yeah.
thing that I like about it, Liz, that really is, I think it's a user friendly way to think about life. And that you can hear these things, which I would start with that when you talk about the core issues. And so when people are interested in counseling, coming to therapy, there are usually 6 areas where folks struggle with, and that those are the core issues. And we're going to go back in a few minutes and talk about the origin story. But people struggle with the and this is one definition of many, but the sense of self. So the
Mhm.
idea of their self-esteem, and that is so deeply rooted to the work that we're talking about. It's like, what is my sense of self? And I spent in both my master's and doctorate 10 years, you've heard me say the story, studying self-esteem. And so I had felt like I really understood it. And until I entered into this work, the depth of it, which I'll talk about a little bit, but most individuals who come and see us have some challenge with, and that's the core issue, the sense of self. And when I go into a one down, which is shame, and when I go into a one up, which is grandiosity, and both are problematic with us,
Mhm.
all of us. And it's such a word that everybody knows. But I, again, think of the depth of understanding in this model. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it. But the boundary system that we teach, everybody talks about boundaries. But what is a boundary? And there are many authors who have written many things on it. But I think the way that we teach the way to protect yourself in a healthy way, and again, to have a mindful approach to it, is revolutionary. And that sounds dramatic, but that's really what I believe. And I would invite you into that one, just as we're talking about what are these core issues. So it's a sense of self,
Mhm.
self-esteem, it's a boundary system. But as you learned this model and boundaries, would you want to add anything to that?
Well, I just think straight into culture at large and how this particular one becomes such an upstream battle or whatever because the norm really is, I think, and the phase of life that I'm in, I've got 2 young children, so I'm in the throes of parenting and I'm constantly analyzing like, am I teaching these kids to be moderate and have confidence but not feel better than others, or not treat others like they're better, or not fall into shame and feel like they're not good enough when something, but not rescue them, out of that pain. And it's such a balance. It's such a balance, but there's just so many nuances, and probably just need to pause and acknowledge, like, no part of this work is about getting it right, getting it perfect. We talk so much about moderation in each of the core
Mm-hmm.
areas. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like, boundaries related to our sense of self, and
Mm-hmm.
boundaries related to relationships and what we're
Mm-hmm.
giving and what we take in, are just
Mm-hmm.
this critical piece that we talk so much about. And I think we do a lot of work around with our clients that are trying to do this
Mm-hmm.
healing.
Mm-hmm. And every person who comes to us can use this part of the work in understanding themselves. And I love what you just said and how they take in the world and how they express themselves in the world. That would be it in one sentence. And it's so important and a perfect segue to our third core issue, which is knowing yourself, which is the idea of that for most of us, one of the things about coming to therapy is about who am I? Who am I really? Who Because how I show up in the world is not necessarily for most of us who we really are. So again, in the idea of we have conscious awareness, but for so many of us, we have lived out of an unconscious part of us where we have a belief about our story, which again we'll talk about more, but really getting to understand that is so important for all of us, and we emphasize that. That's that third core area. The fourth area is about that we all have needs and wants, and there's this idea of again how we relate to the world. With each one of these, it's an internal process and an external process, and so we allow the space for people to look at their needs and wants. They're not, for so many people who listen to us, if they express their needs, they were told they were selfish, or that they express themselves and that it has a negative connotation. And so that, of course, the other side of that is if we just live out of our wants, that creates chaos. And so it's like understanding. You use the word moderation, which is our sixth core pillar. If you're talking about kind of the things that hold this model up, and we look at and I actually, I think about this as so important, is this part of, again, the opportunity for each one of us to live in a balanced way. And this is, I could tell you many funny stories about working with people. Most of us have a tendency, not all of us, but uh, to go into extremes. It's like all or nothing, black or white, that kind of thing. And so we really in this model again, and that's part of this, the cognitive, that we all are teachers, and that folks who come to us, I don't want this to be magical or mystical. I want you to know here's what we're working on. We're really paying attention to that balance in your life, like the way you were describing in parenting your children. So all the things I've said thus far, I think are so important in that. And then the
Yes.
last one is, go on. Anything you want to add right there?
Oh, no, me, I'm just soaking it all in. I mean, I definitely have a soft spot for the hero children out there. And one of the great things about Hawkeye is we do identify those, like, childhood family roles: hero child,
Yes.
lost child, scapegoat, those kinds of
Mm,
things. But I can
mm,
connect in with being that hero child. And, it's just so interesting as you think about needs and wants. And so many
mm,
times I'm sitting in the room with these just really
mm.
successful, they've made it, they're doing it, they're high up, they're execs, they're whatever,
Yeah.
and it's like, boy, that story just goes so far back, and they never actually learned to tune in to their needs back to that esteem thing, the esteeming came from performance and accolades and being on the top. And it's a very motivating, high energy space.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like creating room for this new narrative there of like, wow, I always
Mm-hmm.
had to really bust my ass to like feel enough, you know? And just
Yeah.
kind of sitting with those stories and rearranging the furniture can be really
Mm-hmm.
eye-opening for people to get to the roots of some of what they're, experiencing that's a little unhealthy now in adulthood.
Mm-hmm. And uh, because of our relationship, and I'm not sure if you've talked about it before, but we could have a lot of fun, Liz, just talking about the heroic role, and it feels good and is problematic because
Yeah.
that person who identifies in this heroic role, their job is to disconnect from self and take care of other people and achieve. And in an
Mhm.
unconscious way, there's nothing wrong with that. And I'll talk about that just in a few minutes. The way this model very much teaches from a polarity model. It is not this or that. It's a continuum. And so, yes, there's nothing wrong with being a high achiever, uh, being a type A, as long as you're aware of how you show up in the world and what that looks like for you, and your, like you said, your sense of self linked to it, which
Totally.
is part of what we're talking about. And then this last one is just this idea of the ability to be connected. Is that today, and you probably talked about this some in your work, in your podcast for sure, is the idea of attachment styles. It's something that's really talked about a lot, and it really is about the idea of understanding this core issue is how you connect first with self and then with others. And so again, we try to guide people through wherever they've come from in being able to really address that, and have some skills to move forward. All of this is relational, which is rooted in this theoretical model. As I said at the beginning, is we call this a developmental and a relational trauma model. So these are the things that people come to us in our office and say, I'm struggling with being connected to others, or taking care of myself, or I just feel this sense of I'm bad. I let others have too much power in my life. I can't stop it. And I don't know who the heck I am. And so, you know, there's a way to systematically go through it. But what I just gave you was all the different ways. And those are just a few of the
Yeah.
examples of the folks that come to us. And that's where I think of this as always. I'll say this, I've said it once, I'll say it right now, is this is a hope-based model. It is not I don't think, uh, in like positive psychology model. Nothing against positive psychology, although it does trigger me a little bit, because if we can't go to the root of what's happening with us and we just say, let's just fill in the blank, and that is denying reality. We are very much a model that wants to get the story straight, really look at
Yeah.
the truth of your life with no judgment, and from there move forward with your life.
So, like, a quick question on that may not be quick, but owning reality, really being in reality. Like, how do people do that if maybe they haven't done a family genogram or a family map? And, does
Mm-hmm.
does that mean like knowing the full scope story of your family, your parents, their childhood? Because all of that
Mm-hmm.
certainly can loop us in to what was maybe true, so to speak. But like, how do you own your reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so I'll give you a short answer on that,
Yeah,
because I know you want me to talk a little bit about um,
birthrights.
birthrights. because that's what I was saying that about the roles in a family. Uh, that could be a whole session in itself, talking about
I
that
know.
and application. This would be another one, which I talk a lot about, is that the way that, so I really believe that for most of us, that we have that conscious awareness, but then we also have that unconscious part of us. So when we begin to own our own reality, that's why we start with mindfulness and attunement to self is, and these are the four things that I say, Liz, is that we know what we're thinking, not what the family system we grew up in has told us or the culture. It's like, what do I think? And then our work also uh, works with our emotion. So what is the emotion? What is the feeling that I have? Sensations are part of the work, and this might sound ridiculous to some of your clients and confusing to others, but part is understanding what is happening in your body. Somebody you and I both studied with, Terry Real, it's where I first learned this, is the whoosh, the physiological response. So the whoosh, the increased heart rate, your breath, your voice. Like for me, when I get activated, my voice goes high. If I become emotional and start to cry, that's what I mean by that. And
Yeah.
so I can live unconscious of that, or I can have a conscious awareness of it. And then that behavior that happens. And it's like a lot of times for us, and I say this about myself, is that I lived a lot of my life, Liz, in an unconscious way. Now, was I who I am? Yes. But did I have a sense of what that meant? No. And so when you talk about, it's a little longer answer, but just to encourage people is, and part of what our work is, it's all the time in mindfulness practice. What are my thoughts? My thoughts. What are my emotions? What am I feeling? Like, why am I feeling that anger now? That doesn't, that seems incongruent. It doesn't seem like it matches. Or my
Mm,
sadness or my anxiety. What is happening to me? Where is that in my body? Because so many of us are disconnected from our bodies for all kinds of reasons. And then again, how does that look? Like for those of us that have a link with emotional eating, I'll just use that as an example.
yeah.
And I might have something stressful happen, and I all of a sudden end up eating a pint of ice cream. Huh, look at that. What is happening to me right now? I might not even be aware of any of those first three, but I know that I'm moving toward something to make me feel better.
Right. Right.
That's a
That's such
short
a
answer.
helpful, yeah, but it's a helpful clarification of the process that that is, you know?
Mm,
And it's pros and cons,
mm,
I guess. It's all pros to me, but for people
mm,
that are kinda looking for that quick fix, whether it's just give me that
mm.
positive psychology way of looking at this or something, like, this is not it. But the great thing
No,
about this is when you're doing the deep level
yeah,
work, it sticks. It's like
yeah,
long-term change. And when you pull
yeah,
back even further and look at, like,
yeah.
generational trauma and the generational legacies that are left with certain things. I was talking to a client just the other day. I was like, doing this work, you're changing the lives of people that you maybe haven't even met yet, you know, your
Mm.
grandchildren, people like that. It really does have that influence. So pull us into the birthrights. We went through the issues, the core issue areas, the
Hmm.
birthrights of a child.
This is one of the areas that I am most proud of, Liz. And again, because I knew we were going to talk a little bit about the birthrights, is that in our development of this model, and again, at this time in our culture, it is being talked a lot about. And this is the geeky part of me, the historian. When I began to develop this a long time ago, I studied the uh, 13th Amendment in the Constitution. And it was actually Abraham Lincoln in 1864. who where this began, and I studied that. And the only reason I'm saying that is not to be political or the world we live in now, but it's this idea of, and this is one time where I'll read you just a wonderful definition that talks about it. Every one of us, so every person that is listening to us or watching you and I right now, I would say if there was a takeaway for you, this is a takeaway for you. And that you deserved these things. And the work is understanding on this continuum. All of us, all the time, are on a continuum. So we teach this as a model of growth, because it's like no matter where you're at on here, if you got nothing in these birthrights that I'm going to explain to you, or you were given too much, indulged too much, because that can be problematic as well, that again, there's hope. And we were talking about that. And this work is all about bringing it to the middle. But as I start, I love this definition. Birthrights are the rights or the privileges that a person is entitled to simply by being born. These rights are often considered inherent, unalienable, or natural, and they are not granted by government or authorities, but are assumed to belong to every individual by virtue of human existence. So let me just pause right there. Isn't that good, Liz? Because you know this work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I literally feel that in my body, and I hope you do too. These are what you deserve, Liz. And that's where we get your story straight. We understand growing up with your dear mom and dad in the family system. And you're not blaming your mom and dad. You're just understanding the impact on Liz.
Yeah.
Same is true.
Yeah. Yeah, Rick, because that's where I love it's not a blaming model, it's a learning model. It's pulling back and it's acknowledging the reality of, what you went through, but it's also very much humanizing everybody else in your world too, because these were the birthrights of your parents and their
Mm-hmm.
parents and their parents. And
Mm-hmm.
anything we look at that just was maybe really painful or toxic or whatever, it's like, yes, we're so quick to put the boundaries up, and we do need to protect ourselves when we need to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also recognizing, like, there's an origin story to
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
But just that quote that you shared, it's like, wow, it's like I saw all these onion layers just peeling away, and it's like, boom, like, that's the truth.
Yep, that's the truth. And that's where, again, trying to model and with our relationship, and some about my story too, and it's like that's part of this, is that uh, you have to understand it for yourself. That's why you're such an incredible therapist, and I'm a witness of the last 4+ years where you've worked really hard to get your story straight and understand growing up in your dear family, your experience, how that shows up. That's those core issues. And then that third column we talk about guides you through how to work on these things. But is
Yeah.
that I started this by saying, all the folks who are listening or watching you and I, is that you deserve this. And that is so important. And a lot of people I've worked with, because of their story and so much shame or abuse they experienced, or wounding, or neglect, which is another wounding, again, we could talk about, because a lot of people grew up in homes where parents were just depressed or struggling financially with work or whatever. And so parents were unavailable in that way. you deserved it. We're not blaming the system you grew up in. And understanding, that's where I come back to. I like the word you use, and I use that word of impact. How does this show up in my life? That's what brings people in. That's why we started with that. These are the
Yeah.
core issues. These are things that people come into us with. But these birthrights, and let me just say, because I am keeping an eye on the clock, so as people begin to take that in and have a thought about that, because everybody that's listening to us has a thought about this is what I deserved. Well, I don't know about that, wherever that might go. But that think of it as a continuum as I continue on, that every one of us lands somewhere here, and that here's the tagline that you and I use, and we start out with is growing up in my family. Did I experience this? What does that mean for me? How might that show up? So these five areas, and that's why I love this definition, because again, I told you earlier that I studied self-esteem inventories, and
Right.
what we teach is I had never heard in spending a lot of my life understanding self-esteem and all the ways that it is viewed, because you said this earlier, but there are three core ways that we all evaluate our lives, and that's by performance, and heroic children most often are performance based, attribute based, which is the idea of what I have, what I've achieved. Some of your successful millennials who have high powered jobs and making a lot of money and have a lot of attributes, that's great. Doesn't identify you in this way. Your children, you're a mom of two adorable little kids. I have seen your kids, and again, those are your attributes, you and your husband. And they get to be themselves, uh, which many of us struggle with. And then other based self esteem, which is I have value because you value me. All of these, nothing wrong. They're all good things, but it isn't my identity, which is again, you have value. It is, and this is the revolutionary thought I think with this, is it's the truth. It's generated from the inside out. And the question is whether or not we're able to embrace it, which is what our work is all about, is helping people to understand the messages they received. So the first birthright is that growing up in your family, you deserve to be valued just for being Liz, just for being you, uh, with your gifts and your challenges. Now, that could be a whole session as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's a birthright. This is what you deserved to
Yeah.
experience. And unfortunately, for most of us, it's complicated, of course, and we didn't feel this felt sense of I have value just for being me. Not everybody, but a lot of
Yeah.
people.
For sure. Well, again, too, I think of the culture piece, just the environment we're all growing up in here. But
Mm-hmm.
I know we'll keep things moving, but I think that
Yeah.
it's like amazing, even after doing 4 years of this work and being in this space, like to hear you say
Mm-hmm.
your strengths or whatever and your challenges. I still felt the whoop, there's that for me, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like challenges, the bad's not the right word. The, the challenges about me. I and feeling growing up like you're not supposed to have those, or now it is like embrace
Yeah.
those things, but there's still this element of like, don't show it though. Like, don't show it. And that
So
sticks
much
out.
so. Yeah. Well, good. Thank you. I know again that we'll move on through these, but I appreciate you saying I made that comment once, which you and I are both passionate about understanding. And so when we say, "Oh, I felt that in my body," it's like that really rang true. So, in spite of my limitations and flaws, I'm enough and I matter. Whew,
Yeah.
that's a big one right there. Is because those limitations, those flaws, to be human is to compare ourselves to others. And that gets all of us in trouble when we do it. Or that and I could ramble on. So I'm going to go on to the second one. This is a
Onward.
birth
Yes.
onward. Second birthright, you deserve this, was that you are a child, therefore you are vulnerable. Babyhood, we understand that little baby that's born, but your 5-year old, your 10-year old, your 17-year old, they too are vulnerable. Parents, one of their jobs, the caregivers you have, is to protect you. And again, this idea of I was vulnerable, I grew up in my family system, my story, and was I protected? What was the messaging that I received in, you know, connection to this? And the areas where you look at this and begin to help your clients understand this is in all the ways that I call wounding, is that uh, or abuse, depending on the person, is that physical. That's an easy one. If parents were out of control and hit their children, but there's subtle nuances with each one of these. Mental and emotional messages that kids receive. Why aren't you like your brother? What's wrong with you? I wish you would have never been born. These are all things that I've sat with my clients and heard them say. But again, the subtle messages of not being protected. And all of this has an impact. There's also, you're in Texas, I'm in the Midwest, is, that, and it's a universal, doesn't matter. That's why I said that, is sexual abuse. And we
Yeah.
know that. And again, as you said, the culture we live in and the messages kids receive and all of that. Another one that, especially for those of us that are, I think, in the Bible Belt, you and I both are, is spiritual abuse. And that's a whole area in itself. And all of these are where kids need to be protected. And if kids have interest in this, they can reach out to you and say, "Whew, boy, I was wounded in my faith and growing up in the system I grew up in," or yeah, I did hear all kinds of harsh things, or huh, you know, that's what I want people to do as they're listening to this, is just to think about it. But what you deserved was to be protected
Yes.
because you were vulnerable. The third core area, which is another one, I'm going to smile and look at you, Liz, is that to be human is to be imperfect. And the message, see,
I can feel your eyes piercing me through the screen.
and
You
and
know my
and
story, Rick.
and I went into that, y'all. Did y'all see that smile on her face when I looked at her and said, and then there's the third birthright, which is in the
Cheers to
system.
perfectionist.
Cheers to perfection. Many people we work with, again, think of a continuum, are on that side of the continuum. It's like the messages I received in my genetic profile and my birth order, I call that the trifecta of self, all coming together. So it's my DNA,
Yeah.
birth order, love that stuff, again, and then the system. And all that combines into this message of, on a continuum of, we're the Joneses. We have to be this way in the world. And
Yeah.
so there's that side when I talk about these continuums. And then there's the chaotic family, this acting out family that has alcoholism and mental illness, and we're not blaming it. We're just looking at these things, and it's like it's a chaotic system. And so that's what I learned. And so it's like, out of any of that, I can take on this message, which that's what the third birthright is all about, is I'm able to excuse me, I stumbled there. Hope we can edit this, but if we can't, there's my humanity right there live for
Yeah, we're
all of you.
keeping that because it's
All right.
imperfect. It's
I hate that.
not
And
like not
I
like you
embrace it.
accidentally said the F word.
Well,
I would have kept
I'll
that in
try.
too, though.
I, I was going to say, I could. You know me well. That's another story, but is a part of our relationship. But is this message that we received? You had the right, you really did, to be you in this way of which means you're imperfect. And for those type A, Liz, I'm sure you can think of 5 of your clients who come into you and you begin to talk about the fact that they're imperfect and that part of this work is embracing their imperfection. They'll be like, oh, hell no. There, I swore for you. So try to keep it a little more tame. And I always joke, we're not in a power struggle, but we know that we're all imperfect and that sets people up. Or if they feel like, again, out of the other side of this, that their life is such a shambles and it's like there's no hope of it because it's such a part of their sense of reality. This is the reality principle. This is where core issue 3, this birthright of being able to embrace your humanity. And when you're able to look at that, because this is where we each learn how to adapt in the system we live in. It's amazing. It's a resiliency factor. It is the work is an understanding that this is not my true sense of who I am, but this is an adapted place in me. Um, I could
Yes.
talk about my work and the adapted parts of me. When we're attuned to them, your mindfulness, the ability to say, oh, there he is. There's that part of me that needs to deny reality because of my story, or that I can't do this because I don't know the answer. Those are just 2 of the strong themes in my adapted self. Um, uh, this is why this is so important.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the fourth birthright, and I'm always sensitive with this one, Liz, but is that all children deserve to have their needs and wants met. So think of this continuum. And a lot of people are really struggling today financially, and that it is about a whole cadre of needs that we all have. And so they're not just physical needs, but there are psychological needs, there are medical needs, and there's education as parents to children needs. And we have a whole list of things where we look at it, help people to understand what needs got met. And this is one of my favorite quotes, is that and we all deserve to experience once. And I'll just say this because the first time I heard this, and so for somebody out there, it might resonate. For others, it might be like, oh, that was interesting. But Liz, once bring joy. Joy brings hope. Hope brings abundance. And that is really why it's so important. And it doesn't have to be something of high value, but for people to have an attunement to that. And if they experience none of that as a child, as an adult, they can overindulge in that because they didn't receive it, or they can experience a sense of that they can't embrace that at all.
Yeah, like, they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to kind of relish in anything that they might enjoy or allow themselves to take the vacation or something like that. Mhm.
Exactly. So they have the scarcity mindset. And so one of the things, of the many things that we're talking about here that you and I get to do, is help people explore both their needs and wants, because these were birthrights. the fourth one, over the last year or two, I have really been exploring even more, and I think is so important. And I'll say is really the essence of all children. And again, we know their personality type. I think we're all born with that little personality, that DNA, the family system that we grow up in. But all children deserve to experience spontaneity and joy, even if in the home there's a lot of struggle. But kids have to have permission to enjoy that spontaneity of their life, to experience joy. And again, I'm sensitive as I say this in the world that we live in, but understanding that I grew up in this system, and that's what allows me to embrace, and it really ties in with what you were saying about using a vacation as an example of it. This is a want. No, I can't do it. And it is in that I'm able to experience playfulness. There's a lot of research now, and I've been studying that, is the idea of how important play is. And we talk about all these things, but this is, again, it's a birthright, and understanding what was that like for me? Was I able to be spontaneous? No, because I grew up in this perfect, rigid family, or it was so chaotic I could never breathe because I was always so fearful. That,
Yeah.
again, that's where our core issues are independent, and they interconnect, these birthrights of like, so that's where three, the system I grew up in, then is the expectation of the system, and then five is the experience. And so what we look at, because then we're able to be balanced when I'm able to experience my complete self, my joy, my spontaneity. And I can't just live there. Again, the continuum, I always go back to that sense of that. And the last one is one that, if somebody is familiar uh, with our work, that has been newer, that we've added to the work and we're really excited about, and it is popular, I said this earlier, is this idea of attachment. And they've done so much incredible research. I mean, I appreciate the work of Dan Siegel, many others, Sue Johnson, and I could talk about a lot of other folks. But the idea is that um, the birthright is that all children deserve to have a sense of secure attachment. And when you're born into the world, this begins, and it continues through your life. It's complicated, but understanding where you are at in this is then how you're able to, again, connect with self. Because if we can't connect with self, we look externally, we look out there, and we have an anxious style. It's like that out there is how I feel secure. Well, I'm in trouble because then I'm looking out there to have my sense of this. Or I've grown up and my attachment style is to be more avoidant, to be more distant, and that's dangerous. That is going to harm me if I am in attachment. So ultimately, what we're working with, and as I was developing this, and I'll give uh, the first person I heard was Rick Hansen, who's a neuropsychologist, and I like Rick's work. And he talked about attachment is linked to interdependence, which is ultimately, we talk about this being a relational model, is that our goal is to be interdependent. And what does that mean, Liz? That means that I take care of my needs and my wants, you take care of yours, and then that it's not my job to take care of you, nor is it your job to take care of me. But we together can be relational. That is interdependence. And that is ultimately the goal. I realize that we're
I
possibly
know.
at
We,
a
like,
time,
did it.
the end
No, I
of time.
mean, like, we're right there. So you went through those really beautifully, Rick. And, I just want to piggyback on something from earlier. It was like
Please
nothing
do.
about this model is us trying to convince people to believe
Mm,
these truths. the work really takes people there to like giving this truth back to themselves. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about it. Like, because just when I've had these experiences with clients that are going back experientially in doing work with their inner child and identifying and recognizing what
Mhm.
that child needed but didn't get, and honoring that and giving it to them. It's just you feel it in every fiber of your body, like, well, yeah, that child is valuable,
Mhm.
because now here I am, I'm holding her, and it's just such an amazing process, and it's hard to explain in some ways, but the nature of it really is, you're able to move clients through that work to that space, and we don't have to stand there trying to prove this stuff. They just deep
Yeah.
level really begin to know that it is true. So, thank you for describing all of those for the listeners and for me again. I feel like I learn something new every single time I hear you talk. So, I'm just very grateful that you shared this time with me today. And as we do wrap it up, is there anything that you would kind of leave listeners with as just a takeaway, or,
Mhm.
a message to somebody that might be considering doing this
Mhm.
kind of work?
Mhm. Well, I will say just, and I'll call this a trailer, Liz, for you and your practice. And if anybody is listening, they can reach out to me. I am in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we have a network of people, the Trauma Networker, that people can look at. And
Great.
please feel
I'll
free
put
to,
a link to all of that stuff too in the
yeah,
notes so people can go straight to
yeah,
that.
yeah. We have folks trained all over the country, and um, uh, but is that I would say is that my trailer is just that you described today. The work of Richard Schwartz and Parts work is really popular. It's been around for a long time, and yes, that is another part of the work, is that giving people the opportunity to really do this incredible inner child work that we call reparenting the historical self or selves, where you're able to go in and really give that child what he or she they did not receive, and it is transformative. And so we that's our last thing that we've run out of time that people can contact us about is the experiential processes, which there are several, and it's all rooted in Gestalt theory. Not that unless a therapist is listening means anything, but it's about really being able to experience in the here and now the historical story. So I have
Yes.
appreciated being here, Liz. Again, I just am so thrilled. It's just wonderful to be with you, your work, your vision, what you've created there in Texas. And that I would just encourage people to, again, as they would reflect on this as we're ending, to just know that they're worth it, that their story matters, and that if this has resonated with them at all, to reach out to Liz, because this can transform your life.
Boom. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thank you, Liz.